because this idea of control, I saw it, I put it on the table. I looked at it and I said, I don't want to live that way. I'm done with that. So what else? If I let go of that, what are my hands here for? What can I do with them now?
Nice.
Right?
Welcome to the Hard But Worth It podcast. Today we have our guest, Brooke Winter. And I don't know what we say. She's a founding owner of Clarity HR, I think the last 5 years.
Yeah.
The way I know you is poker night, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's fun where you get to know people kind of first impression.
You do.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't play at the same table. We were at two different tables, but I also got to know your husband, Adrian.
Mm-hmm.
But it's fun to just see, I think, meet people in different contexts. But today we have you, Brooke, the business owner, the entrepreneur, the leader in our community. So pull us in real quick, Brooke. Your current reality today, like what are you doing? What's your weeks look like? You know, how do you interface with your clients? Like pull us into today, the day of the life of
I
Brooke
love
Winter.
it.
Yeah.
That's great. And we'll have to come back to first impressions from poker.
Yes.
Because you kind of dropped that and then you didn't say
I
what the
did.
first impression was. I'm super curious.
There you go.
What does weeks look like for me right now? Well, it's been 5 years working on the business and in the business, and now it's shifting. So very much the less of the in the business and on the business. So I'm doing less consulting day to day. So I'm not working with clients as much face to face. I definitely have clients I still work with, but for the most part, I'm just figuring out how do we grow this business? How do we scale? We've been national for over a year, and that's been very interesting and had its own set of fascinating opportunities and obstacles too. And so right now what I'm working on is how to get our brand out, brand awareness, advertising, marketing. We've always been fantastic at client referrals. Our clients have always been great at telling other people about us, but I want to figure out how do you do marketing? You know, what does that look like to actually go generate sales leads? So one of the things I'm working on is podcasts and YouTube and recording and making content, which is a lot of work, as you guys know. So that's been a whole other side of the business I've never really tapped into, and it's time. I mean, my team is constantly making content. That's what we do. Mm-hmm. We coach, we train, we educate, but we don't actually record it. We don't actually publish it. So now it's time to just flip that dial and see what that looks like.
Wow. So my first impression, back to that, was very cordial, very fun. And I could hear your table having more fun than ours. So I imagine that you might have played a role.
Yeah, usually
in some of that.
I am, where I am, the party is.
The party is kind of hangs.
Sure.
I kind of felt that going on that night.
Can you give us just a little bit more understanding or clarity about what it is you guys do?
Yeah.
What is the service you provide in this work?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Well, I'll go back to kind of the origins of Clarity, which was originally Brooke Winter Consulting. So we made that shift a couple of years ago to Clarity, which has been fantastic. The original goal was that I saw small businesses who needed HR. So they were waiting until they hit, 50 employees before they even thought about HR. And a lot of those small businesses were getting into issues. They were coming up and bumping against all these employment laws they didn't even know existed. They were having problems with communication on their team. And those are all things that HR needs to be helping with. And so I realized there needs to be an in-between. There needs to be something between I'm a huge corporation and I have an entire HR department, and I'm a small, medium-sized business and I just need some help. I just have a few questions. And so that was a space that I originally wanted to step into. And what I found is it wasn't just small businesses and entrepreneurs who needed this service. There was actually a whole other group of businesses, some medium to large businesses that needed expert level help, needed consultants to come in and just cut through the noise, take out the speed bumps. HR, there's a lot of documents. It's known as the police, we're the paper pushers and all these negative things.
Yeah.
So that tends to be the last thing entrepreneurs want to bring into business.
Yeah, until they have a lawsuit.
Until lawsuits
there's
start
some
flying.
pain, yes, until they have pain. And then they're like, help. And I get it. We've all been there. Starting a business is a lot of work, and you have to be cautious about what roles you take in your business. So anyways, all that to say, so we were able to help entrepreneurs, small businesses, and just answer their questions, set up their systems, get them the infrastructure like handbooks and job descriptions, things they needed to be compliant, set expectations for their staff, which really is what those documents do. It's not just about having the paper. It's how are we communicating? How are we being clear? How are we protecting our relationships? And we believe process actually does protect relationships. And so we were able to set all that up for small businesses and then hand it back to them and say, here you go. And when you have questions, we're here. We can help you maintain it, But for the large businesses, what's been really excellent is walking in and giving them some analysis. So maybe they've been in business for 20, 30 years. They have hundreds of employees, and they're realizing there's just some problems, but they can't put their finger on it. It's too hard to identify where's the leak, what's the source. And so because this is what we do day in, day out, we're able to go into those businesses, do an analysis, 30, 60 days, come back with hard data on here's where the leaks are. Here's what you need to plug first. Here's your priorities, and here's why it's happening. And then we give that information over to them. They hand it off to either their internal HR department or keep us on to help implement some of those changes. But usually, again, we're able to cut through the noise. We're able to say, this is what matters and this is what doesn't. And here's why.
It feels, I think, one of the barriers as a business owner in partnering, but I agree, at some point you face a level of pain where you go, the cost of avoiding this issue is more expensive than pulling in a partner. But one of the barriers I've experienced is it feels so personal. Like, you're talking about my internal HR, my company.
Yep.
I'm bringing you into my home.
Yeah.
And so there's a level of learning how to build trust because there's so much culture. It's very vulnerable. And I think, too, we've seen people operate from a level of, I've got opinions about how you run your family, but they're not showing up to really, with any type of compassion or empathy. So how do you overcome that barrier? Because I imagine that's one of the things you face, or why some listening in may not be making that phone call, recognizing they actually need to pull a partner in.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's cheesy, but this is one of our taglines, is we put the human back into human resources. So I've worked in large corporations. I've had multiple bad experiences with HR myself, and I'm in HR. I get what it looks like for them to come in and be the bad guy, for them to be the police. And some corporations, they need that. But I actually believe that when you treat people like people and you have empathy and you understand them and you want to know them, it's harder. It's actually harder to step into the mess. It's actually easier to be black and white, yes and no, and there's a rule and I don't want to hear anything else. It's actually a lot harder to balance that, to hold it in tension and say, you know what, we have a process, but I want to hear you and I want to understand you and know you, and how do we make this work? How is this a win-win for both of us? That's harder, and people tend to shy away from that because they don't know how to do it. And that's something that we're trying to master at Clarity. That's something that we want to bring. So when we first meet with a business owner, it is often they have a pain and they're just like, give me the answer, give me the solution. I need to know how to fix this right now. And yes, we could slap a Band-Aid on it for sure. We could give you an instant solution and you can walk away, but we ask questions. Tell me, how did this happen? What's going on? Well, this feels like this might be, you're giving us hints this could be an internal issue that's happened before. What's going on with that? And what does it look like for you to have conversations with your team? How do those usually go? So we start asking questions. We get really curious because the root problem, that's what we're interested in. And we're interested in people. So if you just go straight to solution, that tends to be the HR traditional method. You got a problem, I got a policy, right? I got a piece of paper I can slap onto that for you. But asking the questions and understanding all the layers and all the dynamics of people in your business takes time. And it does take trust. And that's not something that I expect owners just to hand over immediately. That takes time. It takes building rapport, and we're patient. We want to build that with people. And we want to work with people who look for partners. If you're looking for a yes man who's just going to slap somebody with a disciplinary action because you told us to, that's not what we're about, And not every business owner wants to hear. Sometimes they might be part of the problem.
Yeah.
That's a hard conversation to have. But the ones that we want to work with are the ones open to that feedback, open to hearing how can they be a part of fixing this long term.
And, you know, I've always, one way I've always seen the HR department is kind of like the county permit department.
Ooh, or
in
the
its
DMV.
in its worst
oh,
form.
gosh, yeah.
You know, and it's like, you think about the county permit, it's like your name is actually the permit department. And yet you're so focused on sometimes saying no. It's like your job is actually to be my advocate and permit me, find ways to help me do what I want to do.
Yes.
But over time, it just loses its way under the bureaucracy of.
Yeah.
And I think
Well, there's a power in being the person that offers permission,
Sure.
Ooh.
right?
Yeah.
And then you can wield that differently than what
Yeah.
you just described.
Yeah, but then
Yeah.
your HR department in that same spirit is just a matter of, you know, reporting and documenting and they have compliance and having this
Yeah.
power.
When I first met Brooke about 6 years ago, and she's talking about starting this HR company, and in the back of my mind, I have this like, say more. What are you talking about here? You know, and she's talking about it. And as you would continue to dialogue and talk about HR, the thing I noticed is your eyes sparkled. And I was like, she's excited about this subject. Because to me, HR at that point, I had this old notion of working in corporate where you never want to walk into a room where a meeting you've been invited to with your boss and an HR rep. There's only one possible outcome for that meeting.
It's always bad.
It's always bad. And so I always think, I mean, you know, and I didn't really realize I had the thought, but I realized, oh my gosh, I think of HR as nothing more than lawsuit prevention.
Right.
Yes.
And there's a way in which maybe it's that at some level, but that's the stupidest way to think about it. And I'm like, oh gosh, Brooke, every time you talk, your eyes sparkle. Like you think this is very different than that.
Yes.
And that has been consistent the whole time I've known you.
Absolutely.
And when you describe HR, it's fascinating. Right? It's a world of human potential, not lawsuit prevention.
That's right.
I wonder if you could take us back now, right? So here, that's your current context
Yeah.
and what you're doing today. I wonder if you could take us back into those years when you were maybe a young adult or something like that, and tell us what was going on there. That what was the starting point of this journey of becoming this leader that's capable of running a business and doing all this very elevated conversation? You know, it's a very elevated way of looking at the
Sure.
world and the humans. Take us back, and who was Brooke then?
So we're talking stupid mistakes time, young adult Brooke. I mean, I think that's how we all learn, right? Like through mistakes. So let's see. So from a pretty young age, I've often been asked to step into leadership roles. So whether it was like Sunday school or at school for student government, that was something that teachers often would be like, Brooke, you want to do this? Brooke, you want to do this? And I often would say yes, because I loved being recognized. Like that felt really good. So I would just say yes. And half the time it was stuff I didn't even want to do, which is so, I mean, you know, there's a lot to unwind in that. But what I realized is that I had a tendency to be able to pull people in, to draw them into whatever the situation was, or whatever the project was, and get them excited. Because I was able to get excited about it, even if I didn't love it that much. It was very interesting. But what I liked is activating people. I liked that part. So maybe the project and how it was being applied wasn't my favorite, but what we were doing and motivating teams was. And so I loved that. Even in sports, like being a team captain, you know, having to step up and have hard conversations with people. I was doing this all throughout my childhood, basically.
Yeah.
And then when I started getting into the job market and, you know, first job, I was 16. I was a hostess. I was absolutely awful. I was terrible. My second night, I dropped an entire tray of waters on a woman with her expensive handbag, and I went in the back and just cried. It was terrible. So I've definitely had jobs where I have not been successful or been promoted, but I learned something every job. And so I eventually got promoted in retail. That's kind of where I found my niche, and I liked selling. I liked talking to people. And again, I had teams that I got to develop, which was great. So eventually worked my way up to a store manager. And through that process, I started as a seasonal employee. I got hired at American Eagle to fold jeans at Christmas. That was it. And I was like, I'm going to be the best jean folder these people have ever seen, right? Like I'm going to be a beast. And I was, because that's just my personality. And they noticed. And so they kept me on. And through that process over 6 years, I got to be a store manager. And I loved it. I didn't love retail, but I liked managing and developing
You like the
people.
leadership part.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I had some really great bosses.
Why did you like it?
Why did I like developing people?
No, the leadership part.
That's such a good question. Leadership to me is about, gosh, I have kids. So it's hard for me not to talk about my kids when I talk about this kind of stuff. It's like you spend all this time trying to show someone how to do something. And then when you step back and watch them get it, and they just are so excited and they take off, and you're like, that's why I do this.
Yeah.
And it takes time and it takes investment, and you have to kind of pull back at times in a way that makes them feel a little bit like, oh my gosh, they just like leave me to do this on my own. And you're like, I know you can do it. Right. So you give them the boatload of encouragement and support, but at the end of the day, they're the only ones who can do it, but you know they can do it. And it's so exciting. And then they get to take off. I mean, I still have all these people that I'm in contact with that I've been able to develop as managers and leaders, and they have their own businesses and they're managing stores and banks and all this. And I'm like, this is so cool to know and watch them through their career path and realize I might have had a little part to play in that. And I think that's one of the things I love about leadership is you're not the star of the show. You're actually behind the scenes. That's the job.
What challenges did you face in those years?
Oh gosh, my ego for sure. I liked being recognized. I liked being the gold star student and having the awards, and so it was hard to let that go. I remember one of my favorite bosses of all times, and I won't say her name, but she was fantastic.
She knows who she is.
She knows. I was an assistant at the time, and my store manager, I didn't love in this particular situation. And she often didn't give me credit for stuff that was mine. And so at a visit, my district manager came. She was the boss that I loved. And she started asking questions, and I started kind of inserting myself to make sure I got credit. She knew exactly what I was doing the whole time. So before she left, she goes, Brooke, walk me out. I'm like thinking I'm going to get like atta girl, whatever. And she's like, I see you, but if you don't learn how to serve, you're never going to get it. And I was like, oh, well, that was not the atta girl I was looking for. But it was such a good lesson because my job as an assistant was to support my manager. And I was not doing my job. I wasn't doing my job. I wasn't serving. So that humbleness component took some time. And I really had to figure that out. So eventually I got to be store manager. I got there, the path happened, it was all good, but I had to learn some hard lessons along the way. So
there was a plaque kind of mounted over the door to the kitchen duties at the youth camp organization that I was a camp director at for many, many years, a volunteer. Hundreds of kids would come through every week, thousands in a summer, and all volunteer-based staff. And hanging over kitchen duties, right? It's like the ultimate sign of service. And everyone had to serve in a kitchen duty. It didn't matter if you were the highest level ranking director to the lowest person on the totem pole. Everyone served to keep a reminder that we're all in this together, and doing the dishes is part of it.
Yeah.
And over the door was this sign that says, you don't know that you're a servant until you're treated like one. And it seems like that was part of this thing. I'm willing to serve. Okay, great.
Yep.
I'm not going to give you the credit. Someone else is going to get the credit.
That's great.
Yes.
And you're like, what are you going to do with that?
Yep.
But you were learning that lesson, it
Yeah.
seems like. Yeah.
And now I notice that in others, right? Because I learned that, and now I can see it. So when I see people in businesses, employees that are trying to rise through the ranks, like I'm recognizing myself. I'm seeing things I had to learn, and you can only teach them, give them so much. You have to step back and see, are they going to get it? Just like that, district manager did with me.
So oftentimes in these journeys of becoming leaders, we face a significant and central challenge. It's like the antagonist of our story. Do you have any idea what that would have been for you?
Yes, because we've talked about this, I feel like a million times. And gosh, it's worth.
Worth. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, worth. So like earlier when I was telling those stories about like taking leadership positions because I felt recognized. It all doing a lot of work. This has been a long time. So let me just say, this isn't an epiphany today. I've been doing the work on this to get down to the root, but it's basically this idea that unless somebody sees me or tells me I am not worth something, which is hard when you're starting a business and you constantly get no's and you constantly get rejected. And I'm not an entrepreneur type of personality. I don't like risk. I actually like structure. Obviously, it's what I do. And so getting rejected and shut down and having to recognize I had terrible ideas and then realizing terrible ideas didn't mean I was terrible. And being rejected in the business didn't mean they were rejecting me as a person. And if the business doesn't succeed, it doesn't mean Brooke is a failure.
Right.
It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you pull us into more into like, how did you figure that out? Because what you're describing is in many ways a way of describing something that lots and lots of people have to work their way through. We get our own stamp on it and our own story around it, or the thing that causes that, right? But how did you so a lot of people need to figure that thing out right there.
Yeah.
How did you? No, sorry. It's as though you're finished, right? How are you doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's still ongoing, right? It still rears its ugly head sometimes.
Yeah.
And honestly, plugging Icon, I mean, if I hadn't worked with you and you hadn't literally stuffed it in my face at times, I probably would have just kept trying to look away, focus on anything but that. And you were kind. Obviously, you were kind. But at times you were like, we got to talk about this. And it showed up in interesting ways. So identifying it was hard. I kept saying it was other problems that I was like, this is fixable. So I'm going to say this is the problem. That seems like a really big problem that I don't really want to dive into. It seems like a lot of work. And so we're going to say something else. And one of the ways that I kept seeing it crop up was in finances.
Yeah.
I hated talking about the finances in the business. Everybody could tell me it was successful, it's profitable, and I'd be like, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about margins. Like there was something connected to the money, even though money was not my motivator, which you and I had established.
Yeah.
I am actually not that motivated by cash.
Right.
But talking about it triggered something. It was very interesting. And so kind of going back to even doing price adjustments for clients. When I had to raise prices, I avoided, a million excuses not to do it. All the reasons I shouldn't, or, so-and-so, whatever. Excuses. And the problem was I was so afraid. I was so afraid to do it because if people said no, it meant they didn't like me. They didn't like Brooke. Something was wrong with Brooke. And doing the work of saying, actually, who is Brooke? Is Brooke Clarity HR consulting? No, there's a lot more to Brooke than just the business. And who I am as a person, the business is just like this little facet of what I do, right? It's interesting and I love it and I'm passionate about it, but I'm also a mom and I'm a wife and I'm a daughter and I'm a friend. And all of those things also add to who Brooke is. So exploring those and kind of really grasping onto that, I had some pretty major things happen in my life 9 months ago. And going through that situation gave me perspective on a lot of areas of life.
Yeah.
It was one of those traumatic events, which a lot of people will have in their lives, I'm sure, at some point. And it makes you re-examine everything.
Yeah.
So that was a turning point for me. I would say it wasn't until about 6 months ago that I really got it as far as the separation of Brooke and the business and saying, it's okay. If the business fails, I will be okay. And it very much was a perspective shift of what matters, what doesn't matter, and letting things go, still caring about the business, still wanting to have it be successful, and I still give it my all. But that's different than saying that is my identity.
Yeah.
It's very different.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you find a moment when you began to look that in the eye and do that work? Because there's no guarantee just because you're more whole or you've integrated that part of your life where you in a sense separated your work from your person. There's no guarantee that results come, because you still may have a bad idea in your business.
It's what does it mean though when you have a bad idea?
Agreed.
Yeah.
But what I have found, which is just an interesting, I don't know if it's a phenomenon, if they are connected, but we're talking to Chris Lamb, but these moments where you finally let go and you do the work to confront and separate and get free, then the business starts to grow in new ways, almost as if that previous mindset was limiting you.
Yes.
Like you were hiding or avoiding or making different
Yes.
decisions.
Well, it's like if you've got a
100%.
framework set up that says, if I fail or if someone rejects me or if all these ifs, I'm a failure, right? If you've got that set up, you will do whatever it takes to not fail. And one of the
Right.
things to do that is not try and not risk. And it's a stranglehold,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
You're literally
Yeah.
strangling the business. And then when you release that, it always feels like you're losing control.
So no formula there, but the question I just have to ask, did you
Yeah.
see then things open up in a new way in your business?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. And my husband was one of the first people to notice it because it didn't just affect my business, it affected my personal life. Stuff in my personal life that I was, again, control, Kirk said it, is a great word for it. You go to, I'm just not going to let go of this because if I do, it could fail. So if I hold on to it, it's going to be better, right? Because I know what I'm doing. Sure. And so I would do that in personal life too. And so he even started noticing after I was doing this work, my interpersonal work on not just the business, but just myself, who is Brooke. He was like, wow, that conversation went very differently with you. You know, wow, you handled that with the kids very differently. And he started recognizing it because this idea of control was it. I saw it. I put it on the table. I looked at it and I said, I don't want to live that way. I'm done with that. So what else? If I let go of that, what are my hands here for? What can I do with them now?
Nice.
Right? And so it's scary. It's scary for somebody like me who's like a control freak. Like, okay, now what am I going to do with my time? But as far as the business goes, I started exploring new ideas like content. I was always afraid to do content because once you put it out there, what if you say something that makes you sound really stupid? Right? Like what happens?
I don't know, Kirk, what happens when that
You guys
You
have never
bury it
experienced
in
this.
future content.
Yeah, I think that was the fear holding me back, right? Is like Kirk said, it's all those things that you tell yourself are reasons not to try, or conversations that I'm just not ready to have. So, yeah.
So that's a hard journey. And it sounds like it started, I mean, you gave me some credit or Icon some credit for that, but really we were just the mirror. You did all the work. And so it sounds like what you're asking people to do is say, go find a mirror. And what's interesting is 9 months ago, you got punched in the face by the universe, we'll say, and you did. And it brought you to your knees.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. And you're right. Everybody faces those moments. You can't tell when they're coming. But on the other side of that, in this epiphany, my experience has been when you look in the mirror, you see something different. And the image you saw originally wasn't the right one. It wasn't, right, I don't know, it wasn't helpful, right? And now when you look at the same mirror, which is just the world itself, you're seeing an image that I think matches a lot more of how we see you, right? There's been that kind of a change. And yeah, you are unstrangling the business. It's breathing differently, right?
Yeah.
That sounds to me like that is the definition of a hard journey. Really hard. What made it worth it?
Such a good question. I think the worth it is starting. I think the worth it is the opportunity, anything can happen in a great way, and the adventure and the feeling of freedom. Like I feel free. I feel lighter.
On this side of that experience,
yeah.
of all that work.
Exactly.
So I love that.
And it doesn't just affect my business, it affects my whole life.
Yeah.
And that was something with business I never expected. I thought, with business, you're gonna do your numbers, you're gonna learn marketing and all of these skill sets you're gonna pick up. I did not know how much you have to do on yourself. And the harder you resist, the more it shows up in your business. It's the opposite of what you want. But I think for me, what's made it worth it is seeing the fruit of it in all the areas of my life, not just my business. And knowing what my yes is, knowing what my no is. And for me, I'm often the person to say yes because I want to try and I want to achieve, and actually being okay with no. Like I'm actually okay with no, and I don't feel bad about it like I used to.
Yeah.
So I think the fruit for me is the freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, it is true that those are connected to, this may be really obvious, but sometimes the most obvious thing is the hardest thing for us to see when we're first person in that role,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
We
for
need
sure.
the outside people, but it is this idea when you work through a process of letting go, and for you it was control. Often it might be a control thing, the illusion of control. You become really open to holding on to new things, but so often there's this fear of loss that's telling us we have to grab a hold of everything. You talked about knowing what your yes is. I think that's one of the results of doing this work is we become really confident in the things we believe are going to bring the most contribution, whether it's related to vision or motive or even a sense of reward. There's just satisfaction in what we're doing. We can be really given to those things, even better, and in a sense, do less, but we get more done because we're focusing our life now into the things that bring the most satisfaction. And then obviously the no's become really clear too. I think when we're tangled up in that, it's like the whole world is like we're missing out. So we hold on to everything. We got a little piece of a lot, but we don't have much.
And it's just too heavy.
Too heavy.
It's amazing what, like you said, you feel lighter, right?
Yeah.
Carrying something like what you're carrying, when you're carrying the right thing, it's not as heavy as it looks. When you're carrying the wrong thing, it's much heavier than you thought.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when you watch somebody who's operating in their flow, operating in this space, their capacity to carry, like they can carry so much more, which is what you mean.
Right.
It's you get more done, you are more productive because it's just not that expensive in the same way that trying to do things you suck at.
Yeah.
It's just exhausting, right?
That's right.
So have there been any new hidden talents or superpowers that because you've let go, you're seeing this new passion or even talent or strength that you're like, whoa, I'm actually really good at this.
Ooh, that's a great
And
question.
I'm thriving here, and before you weren't. So have you become aware of any of that?
That's a great question. I would say probably no. I think it's a talent I've probably always had, but like you said, it's being uncovered right now, is giving freedom and autonomy to my team. I feel like I've always been pretty good at letting them be them, activating them, but stepping back and letting them do what they're great at and not micromanaging, because again, control shows up in a lot of ways. And I'd be like, oh, I'm a great boss, totally right. I'm an expert over here. No, like there was opportunities for growth for sure. And so I think over the last 6 months, just saying, hey, this is your area of ownership. You let me know what you need from me. Here we go. Like that's a freeing and scary feeling. But people step up.
Yeah.
Like I have a fantastic team. I have a fantastic husband. Like I have partners all throughout my life that I wasn't letting them help me because I was so holding on to things so tightly. So I don't know that that's a superpower necessarily.
Okay, time out. That's the definition of a superpower.
Oh, okay.
That's one of the things that happens with the superpower thing is because you're doing it somewhat naturally, because you've always kind of had an aptitude towards it, you can't even see how cool that is, right? Scarcity creates value. When you have an abundance of something, it's inflationary. And you're like just throwing it away like, yeah, that's just not a thing. It's a thing.
Yeah.
And if you can grab it and see it and hold it and value it, you can also become a master of it.
Right.
That's the thing that's cool. Look how much more that could do in the world.
Totally.
And look how easy it is for you. You built a whole company around that notion.
Yeah. Yeah.
You might call it a value proposition in some context, or I like superpower.
Yeah. No, it's been an interesting journey, and I think the letting go and having the hands open is the best way I can say it. Like I'm interested to see what else is there, because it's been a long time of holding on to things really tightly, and this has just been a few months of letting go. Like ask me that question in a year, in 6 months from now. I'll probably have a completely different answer for you.
Sure.
It just takes time. So.
Cool. Foreshadowing.
Ooh.
We'll have Brooke back in a few months and we'll find out.
That's right.
So this journey that you're describing of, I think you framed it as I had no idea how much starting a business would be about working on myself. Right? I think that's a really, really powerful insight. We think business is something you can go to school to learn, and there's a part of it that's true, right? There are skills and stuff you have to go learn, but increasingly we're living in this world where it's actually about you showing up, about how you are coming to market, how you're presenting yourself, and how you think, and the way your filters work, right? All that kind of stuff. And I find over and over and over that that's actually one of the keys to getting businesses like yours to actually get out of that survival mode. Is there's always a job there to do around the discovery of self. It seems to me that that's what you were describing when you were describing what Clarity HR was all about in the beginning, about doing that for other people and other companies. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Fascinating. You had to do it for yourself first, right?
Yes.
I'm curious, if you were to go back and talk to past Brooke, right? What would you tell her when she was first starting this business out? The 5 year ago Brooke. What would you say to her?
Oh gosh, that's a hard question. I'd have like a whole list of things I'd want to say to her. That's how my brain works.
Fair enough. Okay, filter it.
I think the overarching theme would be, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Just that. Because I think for me, it has to be excellent. It has to be perfect. Has to be better than. And it's okay. Would probably be the thing I would just tell myself, because that covers so many problems.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I asked that question is because where do you need to hear that right now?
Oh, gosh. Man, you guys are asking some really good questions. All right. Right now, it's okay. I think with the content, like I talked about with the YouTube content.
Super scary, isn't it?
So scary. Oh
I have actually blocked the first video I ever made.
That's awesome.
Oh my gosh, that's so real. Yeah, the first one I made, and I it's scary. It's really scary, and I want the lighting and the sound and everything to be perfect, like great quality like this, and that's not real. It doesn't need to happen. It's not realistic. It doesn't need to happen for it to just start it. Just take the step. And sometimes I get so in my head about how it should look and how well done it should be that I just freeze. I just don't do anything. So I've now made 2 YouTube videos. And I've done everything from lighting and sound and editing myself, and just trying to figure it out, because just the process of doing it has been such an internal exercise on its own. And I literally, oh my gosh, I was in my little at-home made-up studio, and I'm trying to get the lighting, and then I forgot to turn on the microphone, and I did a whole great spiel, and I was so happy with how it turned out. And then I went to listen to it, and there was no sound. And I literally sat there, and I just went, and just all by myself, just like screamed, just like, oh, this is so frustrating. And I felt so much better. And I was like, it's okay.
It's okay.
It's okay. I'm not supposed to be an expert at this day one. That's crazy. I would never expect my kids to be like, get on your bike and be riding it with no training wheels day one.
Right.
That's so crazy. None of us would ever do that.
Right.
I would never expect an employee to show up and have the entire training manual memorized. And you know what I mean? Like, that's not a realistic expectation. So realizing, why am I expecting that of myself? It's okay. That's honestly where I just need to repeat that. So.
Well, and it's a vulnerable thing. Like, I think for most leaders, putting yourself out there, whether you're communicating publicly on stage at events, or you're writing a book, or you're doing a YouTube. I mean, there's a threshold you're crossing of putting yourself out there different than just building a business. I mean, there's still the failures and the egos and detaching that from yourself, but then getting into the spotlight where, you're being judged. Right? I mean, in a way, you are being judged. Do people buy it? Do they like it?
You're totally being judged.
Yeah. I mean, for what you think and how you look and what you sound like.
Like and subscribe. Oh, I didn't get enough likes. Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
It's literally.
That's the challenge of it is what you were describing earlier. This thing we're doing out in the world, the content, the business, the products we create, the services, all that stuff that we're doing is open for critique. In fact, it needs to be critiqued. You do all this work on how to receive and give feedback. That's judgy. Tell me what you thought of how I did, right?
Yeah.
So, but there's a space below that, the who is Brooke? Is Brooke worthy of love and acceptance? Well, that's not judgeable in the same way.
Yeah.
We can't hold those two things as the same, but we tend to merge them together so fast, and one evidences the other. And so going out and doing YouTube videos is just another way for you to learn that lesson again.
Exactly.
When I first started doing podcasts, it started with podcasts, not videos, from years ago. I began to realize that they say the biggest lie ever told on the internet is "I agree" when you push the terms and condition. And I was like, oh, right, that's true. But the most vulnerable button on the internet is upload.
Oh,
Let's put this out there and see what happens.
Yeah.
so true.
And then it goes out there and nothing happens.
It's still so scary. Every step of that, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, your talent and skill and experience in folding jeans. How has that shown up in your life today? Are you still just like on it, super awesome?
Oh, so
like, do your
bad.
kids know how to fold jeans better
Oh, for
than?
sure.
Do-
Yeah,
oh my
brick
gosh.
fold. There's like tri-fold. I can like list all the different styles.
man.
It's bad. It's in my dreams. Like I'll literally still have dreams of folding jeans. Yes, it's bad. It's totally still there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool. So, Brooke, if someone wanted to get a hold of you at Clarity HR, how would they do that?
Oh, let's see. So the best way to get a hold of me would be call us, text us. We actually like talking to people. Believe
Okay.
it or not, we love that. And
Get a phone number?
Yeah, 530-238-5642.
That's all you gotta do to get a hold of you?
That's right.
Boom.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
So, and if you're not a big caller or texter, you can email us at info@clarityhrconsulting.com.
And what would you say are some of the kinds of people that clients or companies that you work with?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we often work with first-time business owners who are just trying to figure it out. And I've personally been there, so I very much get it. There's a lot of grace for them. Like, we are here to help you. We're not here to judge you. Like, we very much get it. So call us. We'll help you get all of those building blocks set up so you feel stable, so you can sleep at night, so you're not wondering when am I going to get sued. And then we also work with companies that have been in business for a long time and just feel like things might have gotten out of, alignment. They need someone to tell them where to go. We can, again, cut through the noise and just tell you, here's the top 3 things to focus on. And if you do this, here's the results you're going to see. Those are also great contacts for us too.
Awesome. I think that the journey you've been on is the very essence of what you do with other people in some ways. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you're doing it with whole companies now.
Yeah.
So really, if you're going to get a hold of Brooke, get ready for a mirror, right?
Yes. That's
But I
right.
hope what people get out of this this episode is that the mirror has incredible value,
Yeah.
and that HR is not about lawsuit prevention. They're not the cops. They're actually people that their eyes sparkle when they talk about this human resource, and that there's a way to treat it that is actually completely different than this compliance word that we throw around.
That's right.
That's why we get hold of Brooke. She's
Thanks.
done the work.
That's right. Thanks, Kirk.
You bet.
Thank you, Mitch.
Well, thank you, Brooke. Great conversation,
Yeah, my
and
pleasure.
we look forward to having you back to continue the story. Thank you for watching and listening, and we want to ask you, if you enjoyed this, please like it, share it, turn on that bell for notifications, and we will see you next time.